want to take off the nuclear weapons.
Drive like mad right now for Crimea.
Wow.
Now,
And this is the real.
but you know the odds are with you. Now,
You're not joking.
That's the end of Putin. The Ukrainian army could be at Crimea within a week. Putin is going to lose this war.
This is our perfect picture of heaven.
President Zelensky says, we have killed and captured.
It's a double game.
So-
Many people die and lose their families
Because that's the only thing that gives the Russians hope.
so that they cannot threaten the world anymore.
I don't believe it's a matter of hope.
So take Mariupol very soon. You see.
No, we're going to take it all back.
Hi everyone, it's Lisa, Clinical Wizard, and my very special guest today is Duglас Кон, Captain Douglas. He is military historian and he is a great warrior. He's got a lot of military experience in Vietnam and he came here to educate Ukrainian army, but something went wrong. We'll ask him what and how did it go during the full-scale invasion, and he's got very important messages to say to us, to our militaries, to the Ukrainian generals, and maybe to the society. So let's listen and ask the questions. Hi, Doug.
Hello?
How are you doing?
Fine. Would you like me to just begin?
Tell us a
Or do you
little
have a
bit about your motivation, why you came here, when you came here, how much time did you spend in Ukraine, and how is it going for you so far?
Been 3 weeks here. I knew the action was going to be in this area, so I came up to Mykolaiv. And sure enough it was. And as soon as the Russians left, I slipped into Kherson hours after they left. And then I spent about almost close to a week in Kherson. And I ended up briefing other journalists there, primarily because the journalists do not have military background. And a lot of the journalists are interested in human interest stories, but not the military story. I'm here strictly for the military story. I'm here to make sure that the reporting is accurate so people in NATO and the United States know what is actually happening. I'm also here to give our opinion because I represent a large number of general officers. I belong to a group called Critical Issues Roundtable. And Critical Issues Roundtable consists of a large number of retired generals and admirals who advocated, per the letter that I showed you, that I come here and give our opinions. And that's what I'm doing. We saw very clearly what was going to happen at Kherson. The Russians lost at Mykolaiv, then fell back and created a bridgehead at Kherson. Then they made a fatal mistake. They poured as many as 63,000 troops into the area, and they couldn't support them because to support them they had to have supply lines over the river, and of course the Ukrainians were knocking out the bridges, the pontoon bridges and the regular bridges, and the supply line was interdicted. And so no sane military person would have ever put all those troops here. That order could only have come from Putin. The generals then tried to get about 24,000 men out, and they were slaughtered. That's when the defense minister in Moscow, along with the commanding general, announced a retreat. Nobody announces a retreat. The only plausible reason they announced a retreat was they were hoping that the Ukrainians would be willing to let them have free passage if they gave up the city of Kherson and the perimeter that was defending it. Of course, they were wrong. That didn't happen. Thousands of Russians surrendered. Others took off their uniforms and tried to pretend to be civilians, and I got pictures of some of those who were captured. Others tried to get across the river. And of course, many of them perished in the water because not only would they perish from artillery fire, gunfire, and so forth, but they would perish because you can't survive in cold water very long. And if you've got full equipment going into cold water like that, anyone who went into the water did not make it. So they had tremendous casualties. So it was not a retreat. It was a rout. And an army that's routed is worthless, easily defeated. They're demoralized, disorganized, easily defeated. And it was my hope and expectation that the Ukrainians would take advantage of this. Neither side wanted to destroy that dam 60 miles north of the city. And as a result, that dam was the opening for the Ukrainians to get across. They could also put a pontoon bridge on the north side of the dam because that dam would help protect the pontoon bridge. And they could double the width of the access to the other side. And as I understand it, Ukrainians did cross there right away. They also crossed down in the Delta. My belief is that Delta crossing was mostly a feint to draw Russian troops south so that the Ukrainians could get across the dam in strength. It's one thing to get across the river, but it's another to supply your forces, as the Russians discovered in Kherson. It's critical that the Ukrainians have a supply line, and that dam provides a supply line. What's interesting, of course, is north of the dam is reservoirs, and there's barely any troops on either side north of in the reservoir area, because there's nobody crossing there. So that meant that the Ukrainians crossing at the dam didn't have to worry about their left flank. They didn't have to worry about getting attacked from the left flank. Furthermore, the Russians are spread so thin, they probably only have somewhere maybe around 300,000 troops in country at this point. And they're spread over a long front. And that means one thing: they don't have reserves in back of the front lines of consequence. If they don't have reserves, then once you punch through, there's nothing to prevent the Ukrainian army from continuing to drive. Now, what is almost due south from the dam? Crimea. If Ukraine can drive due south from the dam to Crimea, it cuts off the entire southern Russian army completely. They can't escape across the Dnipro River. They're definitely not going back across that river. And they would be blocked from going east by the Ukrainian army, and they would be blocked from Crimea because all the Ukrainians have to do is get to Crimea. Taking Crimea would be a good thing, but the critical thing is to cut Crimea off from the southern army. If that happens, the entire Russian southern army is going to surrender. If that happens, there's nothing left of the Russians between here and Mariupol. So the Russians would have no choice but to draw huge numbers of troops from the Donbass over, and they can't do it. They're barely holding on to the Donbass as it is, and if they deplete the forces there, the Ukrainians will punch right through. The point is this: if they can cut the southern Russian army off, the war will end. Because the Russians cannot simply defend after that. They don't have the troops to do it. They will not have the equipment. They will have lost artillery. They will have lost tanks. They will have lost the ability to defend. And it would be wide open going on across. That is our hope and expectation. And that it's important, of course, to always remember taking cities is nice, but that's not the objective. The objective is to defeat the enemy army. You defeat the army, the cities fall. That's our advice, that's what we hear, and we understand also that it is very important to show these successes, because you have people such as Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the U.S., General Milley, talking about negotiating. You have other people, Kevin McCarthy, the minority leader in the House of Representatives, talking about negotiating. You don't want to hear them talk like that, because all that means is, we know Ukraine's not going to negotiate, but if the Russians believe that they're going to negotiate, it will give them incentive to still continue. The Americans have got to quit talking about negotiating. There should not be a negotiation. There should not be any more of that. The Ukrainians need the weapons. The HIMARS has proven to be one of the most valuable of the weapons. It's the one weapon the Russians fear more than any other. And frankly, it's a pity that we've only given the 50-mile range ammunition instead of the 100-mile range ammunition. I wish we would.
What do you think Americans are scared of?
Pardon me?
What do you think Americans are scared of, so that they still give the 50?
There's always the fear of what they think of as widening the war, escalating the war. Of course, that's ridiculous. How is Russia going to escalate a war when they're already losing? How is Russia going to threaten the Baltic states? How is Russia going to threaten Poland? How is Russia going to take on NATO? They can't fight and win here in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
There's no escalation. So then what do they mean by escalation? Nuclear? Well, the generals, when they got Putin to let them announce the retreat, okay, and a retreat where they were hoping for free passage, which they did not get, but it meant that those generals now have more power with Putin. And those generals are not going to use nuclear weapons. Okay?
Cool. This is a big relief for everyone.
Well, it makes no sense. Number one, this idea of tactical nuclear weapon. A tactical nuclear weapon is the size of the weapon that was dropped on Hiroshima. It's not a small weapon. All right? And if you do it, you've got to equip your troops with special equipment. And then you have to assume that the winds aren't going to blow the radiation back to Russia. So it would be stupid and inconceivable to resort to nuclear weapons. That's not going to happen. The only way this ends is Russia pulls out. Period. There is no other end.
I see. This is really cool, and this gives us a lot of hope to me as a civilian, as a press officer, and patriot of my country who has been staying since the beginning of full scale and is going to stay. And this is my country. I will live here. So I'm going to ask another question, because 2 weeks ago I interviewed the commander of Tatar Crimean Battalion, and his prediction is that we will enter Crimea in May 2023. What's your prediction if hopefully, right now, Ukrainian generals, Ukrainian militaries will listen to you and will change their tactics and will focus on Crimea now? When will our army will enter Crimea?
The southern Russian army is defeated, demoralized, disorganized. They panicked. They've lost thousands and thousands of troops that have surrendered and have been killed or wounded. They can easily be defeated. The key is to capture them, to get the entire army to surrender. To do that, it's drive like mad right now for Crimea.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if the Ukrainian army does that, the Ukrainian army could be at Crimea within a week.
Wow.
Now,
and this is the real.
Now,
you're not joking.
That's correct. I mean, because there's nothing to stop them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they can get there as fast as a tank can drive there. I mean, there's nothing to stop them from going to Crimea once they punch through the line.
Are you sure the Russians will flee the Crimea? They will not try to resist to keep it as much as possible, as long as possible.
Well, there have to be some Russian troops in Crimea, but there can't be many because there aren't enough Russian troops to man the front line. That means they don't have reserve forces. So I don't believe there are enough Russian troops in Crimea to defend it. So theoretically, you know, the Ukrainians should be able to do it. I think what would happen is the Russians would take all of their naval personnel off the ships in Sevastopol and turn those people into infantrymen and try to send them up to defend Crimea. That won't work.
Of course.
The Ukrainian army is now a very, very well-equipped, very high morale, very astute, very innovative army. One of the best armies in the world right now. There is no stopping the Ukrainian army.
Thank you for saying this. This is really cool. Is there anything you would like to say to civilians who are scared to death sometimes? And you know, since Putin cannot win in the battlefield, he terrorizes all of us in the cities, including Mykolaiv. Like, we can be hit anytime and we just don't care, just because we don't care. But many people die and lose their families, and they change their perception of this war. They start thinking maybe we should negotiate just to stop this horror.
That is not what I found on the street. I didn't find that in Mykolaiv. I did not find that in Kherson. You know what I found? When there have been roughly 4 rocket attacks, missile attacks in Mykolaiv on a daily basis. The Russians also started to bombard parts of Kherson. And do you know what the people do here when that happens? They continue their business. Nobody goes to a bomb shelter.
True.
Young people, old people, children, they just carry on. And they know some people are going to die. They know when this incoming comes in, it's going to hit somewhere. It might hit an apartment house, and they know some people are going to die. And how do they behave? As if it's not even happening. I mean, they're so admirable to watch. The Ukrainian people are so incredibly courageous, and they show their courage by being blasé. They show their courage by saying, we don't care.
Yeah.
And I see young people, old people, children, and they just go about their business. And you can hear a crash of artillery, they just keep going. Here, in Mykolaiv now, you'll hear the air raid siren. How many people go to a bomb shelter? Nobody.
Zero.
Nobody. And my attitude is the same as theirs. It was the same attitude I had when I was in combat. If your name is on it, it's going to hit you. Okay? It's like lightning. Okay? If lightning strikes, it's going to hit you. But you know the odds are with you. You know that 98%, 99% of the people are going to survive. So the odds are with you. And you play the odds and just go about your business. So it's not going to do Putin any good to kill civilians. It's not going to do him any good to hit the infrastructure. In Kherson, there was no water, there was no electricity, okay? And yet, people carried on. They got generators, okay? They had wood-burning stoves. There were restaurants that were starting to open. Internet was being restored. Interesting enough, the gas lines, for the most part, were not cut. So a lot of places have gas. And they carry on. So the terror campaign that Putin wants to use isn't going to work. And throughout history, it hasn't worked. It didn't work, frankly, when we bombed Germany and Japan and hit civilian centers. That didn't shorten the war one day. So that strategy doesn't work. So civilians are going to get hurt, but it won't affect the war.
This is really cool. This cancelled one of my last questions, because in Kyiv we were deprived of electricity, water and internet, and it happens all at once because all is connected. We feel really bad, stressed and depressed so far, because this is still very new to us. But when you mention people of Kherson region, Mykolaiv and Kharkiv region, they have been cooking on with the wood logs since the beginning, since March, and they carry on, like you said. So I just thought, yes, of course there will be one day when we will get used to it and we will carry on, because we got no choice. And they only, what is he hoping for by hitting our infrastructure? Even today he released a lot of different missiles, Putin. What is he hoping for? Just to scare civilians? That's it?
Well, you've got to remember who Putin is.
Psycho.
Okay, no, Putin is a thug. I wrote a piece, and I called him Vladimir Corleone, okay, after The Godfather. He's a thug. He's a street thug. He's not a well-educated man. He's not a military man. When he was in the KGB, he was not well thought of by his fellow members of that organization. And so he has what I call rat intellect. He's just a thug. And as a thug, he behaves like a thug and strikes back. But he doesn't have any strategic sense or tactical sense. He's the one who put all those troops in Kherson. He's the one who got all those Russian soldiers trapped there. No general did that, okay? So he just makes one mistake after another. So my best guess is he's not going to last much longer.
Cool. This is like honey to Ukrainian ears. And I will not even ask you how long he will live, because this is a stupid question. But I'm going to ask you the final destiny of the Russia after our victory. We know what we want. We want the complete isolation of the Russian, demilitarization, and we want to take off their nuclear weapons so that they cannot threaten the world anymore. This is our perfect picture of happiness. What do you think? What's the reality? How it will be?
It isn't the Russians. It's Putin. It's
Okay.
Putin. If you get rid of Putin, everything changes.
Don't you think there will be another dictator immediately which will replace
No.
Putin?
No,
And he'll be almost as cruel as Putin is.
no. Because what does Putin base his position on? He's trying to be Peter the Great. He wants to expand Russia. He wants to be Catherine the Great, to expand Russia. It's not working. It's not going to happen. He couldn't even defeat Georgia. He couldn't even defeat Chechnya. Okay? Why did he think he could defeat Ukraine?
Mm-hmm.
He hasn't won anywhere. All right? So another leader coming in, what would he be advocating? More of the same? No. So any other leader coming in has to come in and say, I'm more interested in feeding my people. I'm interested in the economy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in leading, having our people lead better lives. That's the next kind of leader that's going to come into Russia.
And
Because-
you believe so? You truly believe
Well,
so?
there's no other incentive, because to replace a Putin with another Putin, when Putin failed,
I think they will elect another Putin.
another Putin would just fail. So who would want to be that person? See, you wouldn't want to do that.
Same
So
cycles
if you're somebody, if you're one of these, Navalny, if he came to power, for example, would not be a Putin.
But don't you think that he is imperialist too?
Pardon?
Don't you think that he is imperialist too? He
No.
wants the empire to extend, no?
No. After World War II, who came into power in the West? More Hitlers? No.
Mhm.
More Mussolinis? No.
Mhm.
That didn't happen, because those people proved that what they were advocating didn't work. And so the leaders that came in after them had to do that which the people needed and wanted. And the people wanted to lead better, peaceful lives. They wanted their economy to be strong. They wanted to have warm homes. They wanted to raise children and so forth. And a leader who comes in and offers that is going to be very popular, especially after the fiasco that you're seeing with Putin.
Mm-hmm.
Putin is a small-time Hitler, basically. And
We all know that.
and how many Germans?
He's worse than Hitler, to be honest.
Well,
By the extent of his war crimes, he is worse than Hitler, in my opinion.
actually, you have to go back to Genghis Khan before you get worse than Hitler. But the fact of the matter is that Hitler was so bad. How many Germans today have a positive view of Hitler? Of course, there's some, but the vast majority do not.
Yeah, I agree.
How many Russians are going to have a positive view of Putin once they know the truth? Because they don't know the truth right now. My daughter-in-law is from Kharkiv.
Mhm.
Their family had friends on the Russian side. They're going back and forth. They called some of those people, and the Russians that they talked to have been told lies, and they believe these lies. Okay, it's not that they're bad people. They've been told all these lies, and they're going to be told the truth when this war is over, and that's the end of Putin.
Do you think they will believe and that reverse brainwashing is working, that it will work for
Well,
Russians?
the fact of the matter is, Putin tried to do this fast and failed. He had to call up 300,000 troops. I don't think he got 300. I think he ended up with about 200. Not trained, conscripts. They're not trained soldiers. And those people are getting killed on the battlefield. And you can't hide that from the public.
Mm-hmm.
And the Russian public is finding out more and more and more. And when you have the top military people in Moscow announcing that they're retreating from Kherson, how do you spin that? How do you tell they didn't lie about that? How do you spin that? That's not exactly victory. That's not telling the Russian people we're winning. They're losing, and the Russian people know they are losing. And if they lose Crimea here, then they're going to know. No, I don't see, Putin is going to lose this war and Putin is going to lose his job. Nobody can give you precise timing on it, but my faith in the Ukrainian army is such, and armed with all the weapons that the West, NATO has provided, has given the Ukrainian army a tremendous advantage. They have got an advantage in morale, they have an advantage in leadership, they have an advantage in weapons, they even have an advantage in troop numbers. The Ukrainian army isn't going to be stopped.
It's true. We're invincible and unstoppable.
And so, as a result, this war, I believe, is going to end a lot sooner than people think. Much sooner.
We hope so.
Because what just happened, the Dnipro River was a major defensive barrier, and they just pierced it. And there's no defensive, they don't have another defensive barrier between here, really between here and Mariupol, between here and Crimea.
Yeah, so we'll take Mariupol very soon, you see?
That's right.
Is there anything else that you would like to say as a final message to anyone? You can address anyone.
I would hope that the Ukrainian army would give more information. In prior wars, there's been information. In World War II and other wars, people would say, we have killed and captured and wounded this number of the enemy. We have taken this territory. I don't know why the Ukrainian army doesn't say that, because it's no secret to the Russians. The Russians know how many people they've lost. The Russians know what territory has been taken.
They give us, they update us every morning. There is this information how many Russians were killed and how many of the units of equipment were destroyed. This one exists and it comes every morning, the update. Speaking of the liberated cities and towns, they give this information with delay and they justify it by the silence which is necessary for advancing of our army.
There's no question that there has to be secrecy in military operations. There's no question. The military maneuvers. What I'm talking about is once you've been successful. Once you, for example, once you've taken Kherson, there's no reason not to say, we've taken Kherson.
Yeah.
Okay? Yeah. You don't need to say we're going to take it in advance. Though interesting enough, the Ukrainians did say that, but it was a ploy. And the Russians moved, that's when the Russians pulled people from the Donbass over here, and that's when the offensive in the Kharkiv region happened and was very successful. That was a different thing. That was a good maneuver on the Ukrainian part. But it's important that the Ukrainians emphasize their success, because only success is going to silence these voices in the West from talking about negotiating.
Yes.
The word negotiation has got to be stopped, because that's the only thing that gives the Russians hope. That's what they were trying to do here. Crossing back to the east side of the Dnipro River, they thought they could camp out there. They thought that was an easily defended border, an easily defended system. And it isn't. And the Ukrainians need to tell the world that. They need to say, we crossed the river. We're on the other side. The Russians know they're on the other side. No secret to them.
It is true, and I completely agree with you.
And besides that, there's such a thing as satellite technology. So the satellites can tell, where
they see
people...
immediately. There is no point of remaining silent for 12 hours, like they ask journalists.
Yeah,
a good point for media. Satellites see everything.
Yeah, it's important that Ukraine emphasize their successes. Tell the truth about them. Tell the truth about the successes, but tell the truth. And they've got to show that they are winning. Not that they're trying to win partially and negotiate. Not that they're trying to take everything except the Donbass. They're going to try to take everything except Crimea. President Zelensky says, no, we're going to take it all back.
Yeah, sure.
And they have got to emphasize that's exactly what they are doing, and stop these voices in the West. See, and you know, because you still have countries like India that just said they're going to start trading in rubles. Huge mistake.
It will be the problem in the future.
Huge mistake. Okay, so you don't want any of these other countries to start to falter, you know. Interesting enough, China has not. China has said, we're still a partner with Russia, but we don't agree with the war. I mean, that's roughly what they're saying.
That's a double game.
So, but China at least is not, you know, helping that way. Though China's buying Russian oil, they are doing that. But we need to have a common front, and Ukraine needs to understand that the front line is not just the military front line, it's the political front line. And they have to address that political front line.
And mass media also, and economic front line. There are so many of them.
That's right. And that requires making sure that everyone knows that Ukraine is doing as well as they are.
Okay, good point. Thank you, Doug, so much for coming here.
My pleasure.
For helping us out, for teaching us, for all your briefings, and for wishing us the good, for picking up the right side of the light and kindness and the good. And let's hope this war will be over soon, and we are very ready for rebuilding this country. And
I don't believe it's a matter of hope. I think it's a matter of
time.
I think it's a matter of skill and tenacity, and that's what the Ukrainian Army and the Ukrainian people have. They're going to win. And they're going to win a lot sooner than people think.
Cool. I'm happy now. My spirits are very high. Thank you so much, Doug. Thank you for coming here.